Considered one of the greatest webtoons of all time, Sweet Home isn't just one of the best, but it also has one of the most controversial K-drama adaptations out there. Created by Carnby Kim, the same mind behind Bastard, Sweet Home helped define what modern horror webtoons are today. So how does the creator at the top of his game with one of his most beloved series ever end up with what many fans call one of the most disappointing K-dramas of all time? Well, today let's break it down by comparing both the original webtoon and the K-drama side by side to see exactly what went wrong. Now, I've already covered parts 1 through 3 on the channel before, so if you've seen those already, then feel free to skip ahead to the timestamp on screen. But if this is your first time here, then welcome. If you like webtoons and horror manga like this, then make sure to hit that subscribe button. But let me introduce you to Sweet Home. Before this video starts, we have a special announcement. We're doing another voting poll. So last Halloween, we dropped a horror manga iceberg video where we covered over 100 different series. However, only a handful of the series that we covered have full-on videos. So this year, we are planning to cover not 1, not 2, but 3 of the series that are mentioned in the horror iceberg video. And you get to decide which series. All you gotta do is go down in the description below, click on the Google Forms link, and just vote on which series you want to see in a video. Winners will be announced on May 31st, so just go ahead, scroll down, click on the link in the description, and get to voting. But let's go back to the video. The series begins with a chronically online boy named Hyun, who resents his family and then refuses to go on a family vacation with them. While Hyun stays home playing video games, his family complains about him during the drive. Suddenly, a truck driver coughing up blood crashes straight into their car, killing Hyun's entire family. Hyun receives a call informing him of the accident, leaving him completely alone. Sometime later, Hyun moves into a new apartment building and then meets the security guard, who nearly kills him by accident with a trimmer blade. The guard apologizes and welcomes him to the building, asking if he just moved in. Hyun responds so quietly that the guard can't even understand him. The security guard tells Hyun to stop by his office later because there are a few things that he needs to explain about living in the building. As Hyun walks away, we see the security guard suddenly get a nosebleed. Hyun settles into his apartment and then dwells on the day of his family's funeral. During the funeral, Hyun begins screaming at his deceased family, accusing them of not leaving him enough money to live on. As he continues to spiral, the other attendees beat him up and then throw him out. Back in the present, Hyun decides that it would just be better if he ended his life. So, he sets a specific date to do it. October 25th. He turns on his computer and then realizes that he has no internet, which upsets him. Suddenly, he hears a voice say, "So what are you gonna do about it?" The voice freaks him out, but no one is there. Moments later, the security guard knocks on Hyun's door with a tissue stuffed in his nose. He offers Hyun a drink, welcomes him again, and then walks away. Hyun can't immediately tell that something feels off. Before going back inside though, he notices his neighbor, who's a model, heading out to an audition. As she walks away though, she suddenly suffers a nosebleed. Hyun wakes up from another bad dream and turns on the TV later that night. He hears his neighbor return home through the thin walls and then listens as she talks to her cat before taking a shower. Although he's tempted to keep on listening, Hyun stops himself. But suddenly, his apartment begins to rumble as loud rock music blasts from the floor above him. A week has passed, and people in Hyun's online game begin talking about experiencing nosebleeds and hearing voices in their head. The non-stop music from upstairs drives Hyun insane, and when he tries to call the security guard, there's no answer. We then cut to a mobster and a young girl trying to smoke on the roof, only to find that the roof gate is locked. Later that night, Hyun wakes up from another disturbing memory. He steps outside to check his ramen delivery, only to discover that the box has been broken into. He notices a trail of ramen leading towards his neighbor's apartment. As he follows it, he finds blood on the floor, and deeper inside, he discovers his neighbor's cat's collar soaked in blood. As Hyun stands there in shock, a bloody hand suddenly reaches out to the collar. Hyun tries to quietly back away, but then accidentally steps on a pack of ramen. A voice then calls out, "Something to eat?" Hyun then quickly sneaks back to his apartment, locks the door, and then hides under his bed. The creature begins trying to open the door before ringing the doorbell. Hyun doesn't know if it's truly a monster, but suddenly, he hears his neighbor's voice crying for help, claiming that someone broke into her apartment. Hyun reluctantly approaches the door and then sees that his neighbor is standing there. She begs him to help and then call the police, but Hyun asks to see her arm. She then goes silent for a moment before panicking and then morphing into a grotesque bloody monster screaming out for food. At that exact moment, the girl upstairs begins blasting her music again, causing the monster to run towards the noise. As Hyun watches her leave, he then grabs a sweeper and then cautiously steps outside, calling out for his neighbor. He hears footsteps approaching and then he prepares himself, only to discover the mobster. The mobster questions what Hyun is doing, but then recognizes him as a new resident. He notices the blood on the floor, but when Hyun tries to explain about the mobster doesn't believe him, and then he goes and throws a punch. However, before the punch could even land, Hyun's nose begins to bleed, and then he later collapses. Hyun encounters a strange parasitic-like entity with eyeballs, which claims that it exists inside him and is the same as him. The creature tells Hyun to be honest and then asks what he truly wants. Hyun then wakes up in his bed, and everything appears normal. He tries to play video games, but all the servers are down. He searches online and then sees that the top trending topics are about monsters and designated safe areas. Looking out his window, Hyun can see the city in complete chaos. Rewind 2 moments earlier. The girl upstairs, named Jisoo, prepares to leave her apartment when she encounters a woman pushing a stroller. The stroller is empty, but the woman behaves as if a baby's inside it. After the woman leaves, a man approaches Jisoo and then tells her that the baby was left unattended and was hit by traffic. He introduces himself as Jae-hyun, a Christian school teacher heading to church. As they part ways, Jisoo finds him attractive, though not as attractive as her ex-boyfriend. Back to the moment Hyun passed out, Jisoo is playing bass in her room when the monster appears and then begins violently banging on her door, screaming that it needs food. Jisoo assumes that it's because she's being too loud, but the pounding just grows even more aggressive until it suddenly stops. The mobster heard all the commotion and then approaches the door, finding blood on the floor and a massive dent in the door. He notices that the window is completely shattered. Jisoo tries to explain what happened, but the mobster punches her door to compare the damage and refuses to believe that a woman could cause a dent. The mobster and Jisoo carry Hyun back to his apartment in an attempt to call the police, but no one answers. The mobster tells Jisoo to stay with Hyun while he goes to the security office. Downstairs, other residents are gathered, knocking on the security office door. The girl who smoked with the mobster earlier, Wen, arrives and explains that the security guard has gone missing and the entire building is on lockdown. Wen's brother, Hyog, arrives with a fire extinguisher and breaks the office handle. A rude old man barges forward and then opens the building's front shutters without realizing that a tall, lanky man is standing outside. As the shutters rise, the residents feel dread as the man opens his mouth, blood pouring out. He rips his mouth open unnaturally, revealing a giant tongue that smashes through the glass. Hyog screams for the door to be closed as the creature enters and then kills one of the residents. Everyone scatters, but Hyung sprays the monster with the fire extinguisher, pushing it back outside. He then yells for the old man to shut the gate. The extinguisher runs out just as the monster prepares to attack Hyung. Suddenly, the mobster, now revealed to be named Woo, tackles the creature out of the doorway and then barely makes it back inside before the shutters close. Once everyone regroups, Woo realizes that the lanky monster is not the same creature that attacked Hyung and Jisoo. Outside the building, we see multiple grotesque monsters gathering, preparing to break in. And this is where the first episode of the K-drama ends. And for the webtoon, it's 9 chapters long, with each chapter being like 100 pages each. So this series is long, and it really feels like it, especially compared to the K-drama. However, I am still really enjoying this series so far, and comparing these 9 chapters with the first episode of the K-drama, I do sort of enjoy the webtoon a lot more. It has a lot more of a personality, and I do enjoy the characters in the webtoon a lot more. Like, Woo in the webtoon is a little bit more comedic while still being like a badass, but in the K-drama, Woo is just fully intimidating and a bad guy. Like, the first scene revealing Woo is literally him torturing somebody. It really is just depends on like what the vibe you want, because the K-drama is a lot more of a serious tone series, and then later on it does get more into like the drama and romance aspect of it, while the webtoon is still a little bit serious but mixed in with a lot of more comedic vibes. The outbreak started on October 3rd, and 2 days later is when Hyun wakes up. Hyun goes on the internet and then sees articles and videos discussing the monster outbreak, including footage of the president dying live on air. Hyun decides that he wants to go outside, but he's too scared to face the monsters. He tries ordering food, but it doesn't work. So he forces himself to go outside to look for supplies. When he steps out, he encounters a monster with half of his head missing. The monster turns towards Hyun and then says that it heard a sound. Hyun covers his mouth as the blind monster wanders into his apartment, unaware that Hyun is there. The monster walks to the center of the room and then begins screaming that it can't see. Hyun realizes that the monster is blind and then decides to sneak up behind it to try to kill it by stabbing it with the sweeper. As he moves in, his cell phone, which is charging on his bed, suddenly starts ringing. The monster immediately smashes the phone. Realizing that he's no match for it, Hyun quietly retreats into the bathroom and then hides. Hyun stays silent, hidden there all night, not making a single sound, even when trying to drink water. Eventually, unsure if the monster has left, Hyun goes to pee. He carefully aims to the side to avoid making any noise, but he dozes off and then accidentally hits the water, causing a loud splash. The blind monster suddenly asks, "Are you there?" before breaking through the bathroom door with its spiked arm. More spikes spread throughout the bathroom walls, narrowly missing Hyun. The monster eventually retreats and then leaves the apartment. Hyun quietly exits the bathroom, slips out of his apartment, and then returns with several packs of ramen noodles. The next morning, Hyun looks out the window and then sees the world in complete chaos. On the streets below are corpses and a monster with a giant eyeball for a head. Hyun searches the internet for a survival guide but only finds one that says, if anyone is experiencing nosebleeds and hearing voices, should just end their lives. Feeling frustrated, Hyun suddenly hears tapping on his window. He suddenly approaches and then pulls the sheets aside, only to come face to face with the giant eyeball staring directly at him. However, the eyeball monster eventually moves away. The following morning, Hyun has completely lost hope, unsure whether or not that he'll even live long enough to reach his planned suicide date. He decides to spend what might be his final moments watching an anime that he's been dying to watch the finale. Checking the comments, he realizes that the community has gone silent due to the outbreak. Despite thinking that it's pointless, Hyun leaves a comment asking if anyone is still alive. Just as he's about to delete it, someone replies. They chat back and forth, and Hyun asks where the person lives. The stranger responds that he lives in a small apartment building where the entire first floor is blocked off. He explains that his group plans to go outside to gather medicine and hopefully rescue people trapped on the upper floors. Hyun questions whether that's a good idea, but the stranger insists that people need help, even though it will be very difficult, especially with a giant eyeball monster climbing around the building. Hyun then realizes that this person might be living in his own building, and then tries to continue the conversation, but the stranger suddenly leaves the chat room. The mysterious person is revealed to be Hyug, as we see Woo and the other residents preparing to make a supply run. Shortly after, the internet goes out completely. Hyung begins to think that it's all over and that it doesn't matter whether he dies as a human or a monster. He feels drained, like a fly caught in a spiderweb, but ultimately, he realizes that he shouldn't give up. Suddenly, Hyun hears a commotion outside. He looks out the window and then sees a father climbing out, holding onto a rope as his children beg him not to leave. Hyun notices the eyeball monster staring directly at him and then warns the father, but it's too late. The eyeball monster appears beside the man, causing him to panic. The rope rips, and then the father falls to his death. The eyeball monster then turns his attention towards the children. As they scream and beg for help, Hyun cowers on his bed, trying to drown out all the noise. But just as the monster is about to kill them, Hyun throws his TV out the window, slamming it into the creature. Hyun screams at the monster to come at him, and then he grabs his sweeper. The eyeball monster crashes through the window, and Hyun attacks, but he misses. The monster wraps itself around Hyun, squeezing him and cutting off his oxygen. As Hyun begins to black out, the inner voice speaks again, asking him what he truly desires. Hyun stabs the monster directly in the eye. The grip loosens, and Hyun charges forward, shouting that what he desires is to watch the final episode of his anime. He repeatedly stabs the eyeball monster until it collapses. Believing that it's dead, Hyun relaxes, but the creature suddenly reanimates, now growing a mouth and spiked arms. The monster lunges again, but its neck is suddenly blasted apart. The lower half collapses while the giant eyeball just withers and dies. Hyun discovers that it's his next door neighbor who shot the monster's neck, and while it didn't instantly kill it, the gunshot would attract other monsters. The neighbor then pulls out a whiteboard and then asks Hyun if he wants to save the children. Hyun turns his phone into a sound beacon by connecting the earphones, allowing him to hear the noise when monsters approach. Now armed with a custom-made spear, Hyun leaves his apartment and then heads towards his neighbor's unit. As he moves through the hallway, Hyun can see the blind monster and then nervously sneaks past it. He reaches the neighbor's apartment and then he meets... How do you say this guy's name again?
두식.
Yeah, I'm definitely not saying that. I'ma just call you Dusik. So he reaches the neighbor's apartment and then he meets Dusik, a man in a wheelchair with one leg missing. Dusik tells Hyun that he must save the children on his own, but assures him that he can build anything with his bare hands. Hyun doesn't fully understand until Dusik upgrades his spear into an electrified weapon capable of affecting the blind monster. Hyun carries a battery in his backpack to power it, but before leaving, Hyun asks if the weapons can actually kill the monsters. However, Dusik replies that it can't, and that avoiding the monsters is always the better option. Hyun leaves the apartment and then quietly heads towards the stairwell. Suddenly, his phone emits a sound, and Hyun prepares himself. The blind monster appears and then turns towards the noise, but Hyun is no longer there. He's hiding inside an elevator, trembling as the monster passes by. The blind monster suddenly grows a massive ear and then points it towards the elevator. Hyun accidentally takes a breath, and it alerts it. Hyun bursts out and then stabs the monster in the chest, electrocuting it and blasting it backwards. He tries to flee, but the monster counterattacks, which Hyun narrowly dodges. Hyun hides around a corner and then throws a glass bottle to distract the monster. When it smashes, the monster turns towards the sound. Hyun rushes in from behind and then stabs it in the head and continues electrocuting it until it collapses unconscious. Hyun reaches the stairs and then collapses, shaking violently. After calming down, he starts heading towards the stairs when a hand suddenly appears on his shoulder. Another version of Hyun appears and it begins mocking him, accusing him of always ignoring other people's pain and then running away from responsibility. The voice calls Hyun a hypocrite for believing that he's all righteous just because he's trying to save a couple of kids. We then cut to the children waiting when they hear cracking sounds from the roof. Green goo then begins leaking through the ceiling. Hyun reaches their floor and then peeks out to see a massive bodybuilder monster roaming the hall. It enters an apartment and it begins eating a corpse, giving Hyun the chance to reach the children. Hyun whispers that he's there to save them, but no one responds. Suddenly, green goo drips onto his shoulder. Hyun opens the door and then comes face to face with a green goo monster that asks, "You see me?" The creature grabs Hyun's head and then nearly drowns him before slamming him into the wall. Hyun gets back up and then activates his spear, demanding to know where the kids are. The green goo monster, though, escapes through a hole in the ceiling. Hyun calms down when he hears creaking from a closet. Inside is where the children are hiding. The kids ask Hyun if he can save their father, but Hyun tells them that no one could survive a fall from the 12th floor. The children then begin crying, but Hyun reassures them that he knows someone with food and weapons who can protect them. The kids introduce themselves, and then Hyun prepares them to leave. As the bodybuilder monster continues feeding, Hyun carefully sneaks the children out and then towards the stairs. As they move, the parasite inside Hyun laughs, mocking him for protecting them. It claims it knows exactly what Hyun desires. As they climb the stairs, Hyun's nose begins pouring blood. His vein bulges across his body and his eyes turn blood red. And at this point in the series, I'm honestly enjoying the webtoon a lot better than the K-drama. The K-drama cuts a lot of the backstories for the main characters while also making certain characters more important than the others. Most characters are completely different from the webtoon, and they also add in an extra character in the K-drama, which is pretty much given Woo's role. So Woo is pretty much just an entirely different person in the K-drama. Hyun also seems to be the main character for the webtoon compared to the K-drama, where the K-drama just has a bunch of other main characters and a bunch of other stories going on at the same time. Now, I'll always suggest checking out both these series to see which one you like a lot better, but when it comes to the webtoon, I'm liking it pretty much a lot better, and I think it's actually pretty good. So the K-drama and the webtoon comparisons are pretty much just gonna stop now. Hyun's body begins to change as he tells the kids to run away. The parasite inside him tells Hyun that if he wants to be a hero, he needs to tell it what he truly desires. However, Hyun doesn't fall for it, remembering that his favorite anime, Maria from the Sky, ended his first season with Maria refusing to fall for the devil's trap. Because of this, Hyun's body returns to normal, and the kids calm down. Suddenly, heavy stomping echoes through the stairway as the bodybuilder monster smashes its way towards them. Hyun yells at the kids to run, and the bodybuilder charges at them, but Hyun dodges. Meanwhile, on the 11th floor, Jisoo, the bass player, hears the whole commotion. Hyun jumps down to the stairs and then lands hard. The bodybuilder monster ignores him and then continues climbing towards the children. Hyun screams insults at the monster, even calling it small, which successfully angers it. The bodybuilder then turns around and jumps down in front of Hyun. Hyun dodges another punch, but at the same time, we see Jisoo convincing Jae-hyung, the school teacher, to check out the noise. We cut to 6 days earlier when Hyun passed out. Jisoo heard strange noises outside and then grabbed a bat to investigate. She entered the stairway and then saw a man leaning against the wall talking to himself. As Jisoo tried to sneak past him, the man dropped his bottle, which rolled down the stairs and then shattered. The man then turned around, called out to his boss, and his appearance began to resemble a monster. He fully transformed and then charged at Jisoo. Jisoo struck it in the head and then knocked him out. When Jisoo looked again, the monster reverted back into being a human. Feeling very guilty, she hesitated, but Jae-hyung appeared behind her with a sword and then warned her not to get close. The man transformed again and then Jae-hyung charged forward and attacked him. In the present, we see Jae-hyung slices the bodybuilder's monster's arm. Jisoo rushes to Hyun, shocked that he's still alive, but urges him to run away with her. We then cut to a live TV broadcast where a news reporter discusses the cause of the outbreak. Scientists speculate whether it's due to a virus or a cellular mutation. However, no one has any of the answers. Back on the 11th floor, Hyun, Jisoo, and Jae-hyung hide together. Hyun realizes that the kids are still all alone, but before he can act, Jisoo demands to know if he's infected. Hyun hesitates, then admits that he is. Jisoo raises her baseball bat towards him, but Jae-hyung steps in, protecting Hyun. He explains that Hyun seems more resilient to the infection than most people, and then adds that God wouldn't want her to smash Hyun's skull in. Jisoo calms down, and then Hyun begs them to help him save the kids. We cut to the children hiding in the stairway, believing Hyun isn't coming back. They decide to move before the bodybuilder monster finds them, but then suddenly, the blind monster appears behind them. Remembering Hyun's warning, the kids hold their breath until the blind monster walks away. They relax briefly, but then the building begins to tremble. The bodybuilder monster appears behind them. As the kids scream, the bodybuilder lunges to eat them, but then the blind monster suddenly returns and then attacks the bodybuilder, stabbing him and then extending spikes inside his body. A battle breaks out between the two monsters, allowing the kids to escape. Hyun and the others hear the fight upstairs. It's revealed that Jisoo had also met the kids before and then bonded with them over the fact that their parents are divorced. Jisoo apologizes to Hyun for losing control earlier, and Hyun understands. The three of them run upstairs and the kids reach the 15th floor, desperately searching for help. Suddenly, the bodybuilder monster appears, holding the blind monster and then throwing it out of the window. The bodybuilder approaches the crying children, but a woman named Lim, the one who lost her baby, steps in front of them, and then tells the monster to leave them alone. The bodybuilder kicks Lim's stroller and then launches her into the wall. Lim stares at the broken stroller and then begins having flashbacks to her baby's death. Earlier, it was seen that Lim had been hearing voices telling her that her baby was dead, but she refused to believe them. The bodybuilder then crushes the stroller and Lim screams in horror. Hyun and the others arrive, shouting for the kids to run. Lim tells the bodybuilder that she always knew that her baby was dead just before he punches her to the ground. The kids run behind Hyun's group as they prepare to fight, but suddenly, Lim appears on the bodybuilder's shoulder, now fully transformed into a monster. She claws at his neck while Jae-hyung and Jisoo engage in battle. Hyun takes the kids down to the 14th floor. Jae-hyung tells Jisoo to leave it to him and then deliberately draws the bodybuilder's attention. Jae-hyung runs towards a window as the bodybuilder chases him. The monster charges, but Jae-hyung dodges, causing the bodybuilder to fall out of the building. Later, Jisoo, Lim, and Jaehyung regroup and prepare to meet Hyun. Jisoo grabs her bass guitar, which once belonged to her ex-boyfriend. Hyun brings the kids to Doobadoowop, and the others join him shortly after. They eat dinner together and then they begin to bond. However, Jisoo remains uneasy about having two infected people present. Jaehyung explains that every night at 8 p.m. an underground news broadcast airs. They watch as a reporter interviews a man who claims to know how to kill the monsters. He explains that the monsters are vulnerable during partial transformations, and while they can regenerate, they can't restore lost limbs or vital organs like ears or eyes. However, once fully transformed, they are nearly impossible for normal humans to kill. The report mentions that one theory behind the outbreak is human desire overtaking the body through a twisted form of evolution. The broadcast ends with the man stating that anyone showing symptoms should be killed. Hyun asks the group to kill him if he ever fully turns. Everyone remains silent until Jisoo steps forward and then asks Hyun to do the same for her if she transforms. Outside, the blind monster reanimates and he hears voices from one of the floors. It launches its arms towards the building and then pulls itself in. It's revealed that Woo and Wen are the ones talking. Woo attacks the blind monster with relentless punches, knocking it down. Wen hands him a strange liquid which Woo throws onto the monster before Wen ignites it with a lighter. Woo shields Wen as the monster burns to ash. Hyuk then arrives to check on them. Woo's group has been clearing the floors and they just cleared the 4th floor and is slowly approaching the 14th. We then cut back to Hyung's group sleeping, with Hyun alone in a corner. Jisoo wakes him up and then tells him that it's his turn to stand guard. She joins him in standing guard, and even though they tried having conversations, it's very awkward at first. Jisoo notices Hyung's self-harming scars and demands that he stop. Hyung tells her that to mind her own business, insisting that no one would even grieve if he died. Jisoo tells him that that isn't true. We then see a flashback of Jisoo and her former boyfriend after a failed gig, still happy together as he gives her a guitar pick ring. The next morning, Hyung looks at Jisoo sleeping and then thinks that she reminds him of Maria from his favorite anime. Doobadoowop upgrades Jisoo and Jaehyung's weapons as they plan to escape the building by car. And even though Doobadoowop doesn't think it's a good idea, Jisoo looks over at him and then says, "Even the darkest night disappears in a dim light. It may be a small possibility, but it's still hope." As they say their goodbyes, Hyun decides to join them. Lim then asks for one final favor, retrieving the child's father's body. They agree, and then they leave. As they walk through the hallway, Hyun thinks that leaving the building is a bad idea, and then mentions that there might be survivors on the 1st floor. Outside, we see that the bodybuilder monster rises again, but in a new form. The group reaches the 9th floor and then they find a dead body. Hyun gives a sigh of relief, but however he's disappointed in himself, giving a sigh of relief over a dead body. Jisoo then searches the body for supplies, and Hyun feels even more guilty, but suddenly, a humanoid monster with red tentacle legs appears and then devours the corpse. They hide, trying to stay calm. The dead man's wallet then slides towards Hyun, revealing a photo of him with his family. Hyun panics, reminding him of his own family's death. The sound of Hyun panicking catches the attention of the creature as he appears right beside him. Jisoo attacks it with her bat, enraging it. The creature then knocks Hyun aside and then chases Jaehyung. Jaehyung tells Jisoo to just run as he's thrown into a room. Jisoo attacks the monster's legs, but then the creature captures her. Jaehyung strikes it with his shield and then Hyun stabs it with the electrified spear. Just as they think that the monster is defeated, Hyun is suddenly attacked and then starts bleeding from his ears and nose. Then suddenly, we see someone calling out to Hyung's name, and then he wakes up in a hospital. A nurse announces that he's awake. We cut to Hyun in a hospital rooftop in a wheelchair beside his uncle. It's revealed that Hyun survived a car accident that killed his family, meaning that he actually went on the family vacation, however has been in a coma the entire time. Hyun wonders if everything was a dream. He remembers very little of it though. We flash back to Hyun joining his family on vacation. In the car, he sees news that his favorite anime is getting a live-action adaptation starring Jisoo as Maria. However, we see his father criticizing him for hiding in his room, basically wasting his whole life. Hyun then lashes out, accusing his father of choosing work over him, saying that he hates him. He then turns his rage towards his sister and mother, accusing them of talking crap behind his back. Hyun asks how he's supposed to move past the trauma of being brutally bullied in school, as we see that he views everyone, including his family, as monsters, and then says that it would have been better if they were all dead. Then, the truck crashes into the car. Back in the present, we see Hyun crying, believing that the accident was all his fault. As he stares at the sunset, he vows to change his life while there's still hope. However, he begins to remember Jisoo's words about hope in the darkness. We then see Hyun's uncle speak about desires feeding on hope, as is revealed that he's another version of Hyun. The series continues with a blurry image of Hyun being dragged while people's voices echo in the background. It turns out that Hyuk and Woo's group are dragging him, but they are suddenly attacked by an infected. Suddenly, Hyun wakes up in his bed, confused. He goes online and sees that on the 25th, the final episode of Maria from the Sky will air. While looking at it, he begins to question whether he ever even had an uncle. We cut to Hyun having dinner with his uncle. His uncle tells him that on the 25th, he has to start attending a new school. Hyun doesn't want to go since it's the day of the last episode, but after thinking it over, he decides that he will. As the scene ends, we see his uncle twist his neck and head unnaturally to look directly at us. As Hyun walks home, he questions whether he ever actually went on that family trip. Suddenly, the parasite flashes in his head, and he hears the voices of Hyuk and his group discussing whether Hyun is infected. Hyun screams at the top of his lungs, but when he calms down, he realizes that no one on the street even reacted. At home, he checks his calendar and remembers that he marked the 25th as the day that he planned to end his life. We then cut to Hyun entering a theater to watch Maria from the Sky. He finishes the final episode, and it ends exactly as he imagined. He calls out to his uncle, or rather, to the monster, and his uncle reveals himself to be the other version of Hyun. Hyun says that he remembers everything. He knew he was trapped in a false world, and that the final clue was the alert about his suicide date. He realized that the parasite couldn't create a new story for an episode that he had never seen before, so it had to show him what he imagined and wanted to see. The parasite explains that Hyun was supposed to live in this fabricated life under its control, while his real body transformed into a monster. Hyun shows up with a spear and demands to know what the parasite truly is. Instead of answering, it teleports them outside to a river. The parasite claims that the humans are the real monsters. It doesn't fully understand what it is, but it believes that the world that it created will be better than the current world. Monsters have only one desire and are honest about it, unlike humans who are hypocrites. Before the parasite can finish, Hyun charges forward and stabs it with his spear. The parasite shatters but tells him, "Good luck surviving." Hyun wakes up in a room with Hyuk and his sister Wen sitting beside him. Hyuk welcomes him and then tries to make small talk, but Hyun remains silent. Hyuk gives him a tour of the first floor and explains that most of the residents don't feel safe with Hyun there, including the rude old man from earlier in the series, Kim. Kim calls Hyun out and then curses at him, spitting on the ground and saying that he'll see him at the meeting later tonight. Hyuk calmly explains that they can't kick Hyun out because he hasn't fully transformed into a monster. Hyuk then takes Hyun to the building convenience store, which is run by the mobster, Woo. Woo asks what they want, but Hyun only asks for a drink. As they leave, Woo mentions that someone died trying to save Hyun, calling it an unnecessary casualty. Later that night, Kim leads a rally to have Hyun expelled. Jae-hyun is the only one who opposed of kicking him out. Hyuk steps in and announces that they'll have a vote privately by drawing a circle on a piece of paper to expel Hyun and an X to let him stay. Kim argues that they should just raise their hands instead, but Hyuk insists on a secret vote because deciding to expel Hyun is essentially deciding to kill him. Kim is furious and even tries to pressure his wife, but several residents support Hyuk's method. When the votes are counted, the result is tied 7-7, and the final vote is invalid. Kim throws a tantrum demanding Hyun's removal. He shouts that killing Hyun wouldn't even be murder anyway because he's not even human, he's a monster. But in the middle of his rant, Kim's nose starts to bleed. Hyun enters the room and then says that he wants to vote as well. He votes to kick himself out, but tells Kim that if he has to leave, then Kim should leave too, since Kim is infected as well. We then see Hyun and Kim locked in a room together. Kim tries to be friendly, hoping Hyun would know how to stop the transformation, but Hyun just coldly tells him to brace himself. Outside, the residents are discussing reinforcing the barricades with metal sheets, but they lack someone that's skilled enough to wield them. Hyuk glances at Jisoo's weapon and then asks who made it. Hyuk later releases Hyun and then asks to speak with him privately. In the stairwell, Hyuk asks Hyun why he thinks he defended him. He tells Hyun that he will serve as their tanker, the one who handles the most dangerous tasks, and if he refuses, then there is no future for him there. He instructs Hyun to go find Doobadoowop. When Hyun asks if he is going alone, Woo steps forward and says that he'll go with him. Meanwhile, Doobadoowop is sleeping when one of the children informs him that Lim has been in the bathroom for 2 hours. Doobadoowop nervously approaches the bathroom door. We then cut back to Hyun and Woo, with Hyuk whispering something in Hyun's ear before they leave, which clearly angers him. As they climb the stairs, Hyun asks who Hyuk really is. Woo explains that Hyuk is just a high school student just like him, but highly intelligent and the group's leader, despite many residents disliking how young he is. Hyuk's main plan is to reinforce the building and then find a vehicle that they can convert into an armored car, which is why they need Doobadoowop. Hyun asks if Woo trusts him, and Woo replies that Hyun should trust Hyuk the most since he's the one who actually saved him. Hyun points out that Hyuk made the rescue team very small, even including his own sister. Woo then explains that Hyuk blames himself for the man that died saving Hyun and wants to avoid further losses. Hyun then reveals what Hyuk whispered: prioritize Doobadoowop and if necessary, abandon the children. Back with Doobadoowop and the kids, they open the bathroom door to discover Lim has transformed into a giant baby. She wanted to save her baby so desperately that she became one herself. Doobadoowop then raises his blaster but hesitates. The children beg him not to shoot, saying that she is not doing anything right now. We see a dreamlike vision of Lim on a beach with her baby as her husband runs down towards them. Back with Hyun and Woo, it's revealed that Hyun actually never told Woo what Hyuk told them. Suddenly, their phone begins to beep, signaling a nearby monster. They cautiously check the floor, and Woo's side is clear, but Hyun notices something strange. When Woo turns the corner to look, he sees a hand gripping the edge of the hallway. They hesitate, unaware that another arm is reaching out from them from behind. Meanwhile, Kim remains locked in a room, and his wife brings him some chips. But he complains that it's not enough and then accuses her of wanting him to become a monster. He notices that she is hiding something behind her back, which we see is a knife. Jisoo then confronts Hyuk, questioning why he sent Woo and Hyun alone. Hyuk explains that using Hyun, who is already turning, was actually the most logical choice. He describes that Hyun's current condition as the golden time, a temporary period before fully transforming. No virus can be stopped by just willpower alone, so Hyuk intends to use Hyun before that time runs out. Back with Hyun and Woo, Hyun blocks the monster's attack using his arm, but it completely shatters it. He stabs the monster's arm with his spear and activates the electricity, shocking both the creature and himself. He continues electrocuting himself until the monster finally releases him. Hyun passes out from the electricity and Woo moves in to finish the job. Woo finds the man face down against the wall with his arms stretched out wide. He notices the man's backpack and then takes the items inside and burns the monster. When he returns to Hyun, he considers killing him but realizes that Hyun is still human. Hyun wonders what the monster's desire was. It is revealed that Woo read the notebook from the book bag, and the man had written down that he could not forgive himself for failing to save his son from a fast monster. If only he had grabbed his son's hand faster, his son would still be alive. Hyuk later admits to Jisoo that he would have rigged the vote if necessary, but it wasn't needed. Hyuk laughs and then asks if she really believes that Hyun and Kim are the only ones infected. Back in the locked room, Kim's wife reveals that when she becomes a monster, she will kill him. Flashback shows his abuse, and then her nose begins to bleed as she raises the knife. The voices in her head urge her to murder him, but she insists that she doesn't need help to kill her husband. Hyun and Woo continue exploring and reach the 7th floor. Inside an apartment that is unnaturally clean but reeks of a horrible odor, Hyun finds a laptop with a notepad that's labeled "Smell." The notes describe the resident sensing a terrible smell and making eye contact with a monster. Annoyed by his roommate's noise and then starting to hear voices, he killed his roommate. Hyun looks over at the closet and discovers that the roommate's corpse is inside. When he exits, Hyun smiles and says that Hyuk was right, and then he and Woo continue exploring. Woo decides to skip some floors, and Hyun takes this as Woo being scared of fighting off monsters. Woo tells him not to let the monster beat him. He can tell that the more Hyun uses the monster, that it starts affecting him mentally, and if Hyun turns, then he would have to kill him on the spot. Hyun then asks him if he really thinks he can kill him, and Woo responds by punching him straight into the gut. Even though it hurts a lot, Hyun thanks him. Woo mentions that it's fine and that everyone wants to live. This reminds Hyun of the suicide date that he had planned and realizes that he does want to keep on living. Suddenly, they hear the phone beeping again. A monster is coming from the 11th floor. They run while the tentacle monster climbs down the stairs. The monster notices a footprint in the pool of blood and then slams the floor door open. While the monster is ripping a body apart, Woo charges in and throws a bottle of flammable liquid, but the monster smashes it midair. The monster throws a body at Woo, but he catches it and then uses it as a ramming shield. Woo pushes it far enough for Hyun to appear and then stab the monster, electrocuting it. The monster catches on fire, but it turns to Hyun and he begins to cry, asking if it's going to die. The monster then escapes into the stairway, and the sprinklers suddenly turn on. The fire goes out, and the monster evolves into a spider-like creature. Now, I didn't talk much in between the chapters just to let the story play out, but there are a lot of key differences from this webtoon and the K-drama. But first, I do want to mention that the NES game called Sweet Home, that I know a lot of people in the comments mentioned, said that the webtoon and the K-drama were based off of this game. But after doing some research, it's actually not. It just has the same name, and the game has zero correlation to the actual webtoon or K-drama. But looking at some footage, the game actually does look kind of fun. But I did mention in the last video that there are a lot of characters that are very different, including characters that were either never mentioned or just have any real significance to the story. However, two really big roles are drastically changed, and those are Hyuk and Kim's wife, who we learn is named Sun. Sun is done a lot better in the K-drama, honestly. She has a ton of more scenes, a lot of more dialogue, scenes of her interacting with the other residents that don't even show up in this webtoon. And while here, she's not really given that much screen time, only during the voting scene and the scene where she reveals that she's a monster. Now, Hyuk in the webtoon is a lot more like a Gojo sort of character. He's playful and always smiling, but has a leveled head, and is actually a lot smarter than he looks. But he's like a joyful guy who could also be seen as sort of a rude guy, but he masks it like perfectly. Now, if you compare that to the K-drama version, Hyuk is very serious, a very quiet dude who just happens to become the leader. People think that he's super smart for his age, but it doesn't really show in the show. He's super calm, but when his rudeness comes out, it's not much of a shock. And I don't think it's the actor's fault. I think it's mainly the direction, but they also made him really bland and really boring. It just seems like he's not interested, or he just seems like very emotionless. And that makes scenes like the voting poll come off really different, because in the webtoon, it's a moment showing not only how smart he is, but also showing his leadership skills, and his later talk with Jisoo about it like almost getting rigged makes the scene even better. But during the K-drama, not only do they not have the talk with Jisoo, but the only reason they have that voting scene is just to shut up Kim. There are a ton of more key differences, but we'll have to get into that in the next section. It continues with Woo and Young squaring up against a now evolved monster. The creature spits green venom at them, but they dodge it. The spider-like monster lashes a tentacle towards Hyun, and he barely avoids it. Hyun tries to stab the tentacle, but it's too hard to penetrate. The monster swings his tentacle across the hallway, and Hyun narrowly dodges it, though he still receives a deep cut on his head. Woo throws his last bottle, but the monster catches it and spits venom that lands on Woo's shoulder. As Woo falls, his phone slips from his pocket, and the monster crushes it. The creature looms over him, ready to strike, when an arrow suddenly pierces his head. An old man throws a Molotov cocktail that hits the ceiling, igniting flames that burn the spider monster. The creature retreats through the elevator. Back with Kim and his wife Sun. Just before Sun can stab Kim, a group of residents bursts into the room and then orders her to drop the knife. The moment she hesitates, Kim screams that Sun is a monster. Meanwhile, The two people who rescued Hyun and Woo take them to their apartment. The woman with the crossbow is named Yuri, and the old man is named Soap. Yuri treats Woo's injuries and then offers to help Hyun, but Hyun insists that he does not need assistance. Soap senses something suspicious and then asks Hyun to remove his hand from his forehead. Woo tries to intervene, but Soap aims the crossbow at Woo's heart and then demands that Hyun show his forehead. Hyun then reveals that the wound on his head has fully healed due to his regeneration. Soap orders them to leave immediately, telling Woo that he never would have helped them if he knew that Hyun was a monster. As they prepare to leave, Soap suddenly laughs and then admits that he was just joking the entire time. He says that an old man with little time left can still have some fun. Soap tells Yuri to stay behind and declares that he will help Hyun and Woo retrieve Dusik and the children because he wants to spend his remaining time being a hero. Hyun then suddenly becomes upset and then tells Soap that he is full of nonsense because no one truly wants to die. Soap replies that turning into a monster is causing Hyun to lose control. Hyun apologizes, but Soap then explains that not being afraid of death and wanting to die are two completely different things. The four of them leave the apartment and then head towards the stairs. While Woo and Yuri bicker about their age, Hyun notices a monster on the upper stairs. Thinking that it might be the blind monster, he signals for silence, but the phone is not beeping. Hyun decides to investigate and discovers that the monster is actually sleeping. Instead of retreating, he quietly climbs the stairs and then signals the others to follow. Soap successfully sneaks past, but when it's Yuri's turn, she is visibly nervous. Halfway up the stairway, her phone suddenly begins to beep. She turns around to see a three-eyed monster staring directly at her. The creature grabs her by the neck and then lifts her into the air. Woo attempts to throw a Molotov, but the monster shields itself with Yuri while smiling. Woo charges forward with a punch, but the monster drops Yuri and instantly flash steps beside Woo, punching him in the face. The monster's body turns bright red and it begins to steam as it says, "Too slow." The Molotov rolls down the stairs, but the monster crushes it with its foot. Hyun realizes that this is the racetrack man who killed his roommate. He tells Soap to find Dusik and the children because they are more important than revenge. Soap agrees, and then Hyun faces the speed monster alone. The monster's body shifts back to gray. In an instant, it flash steps in front of Hyun and then kicks him so hard that his chest shatters, sending him crashing into the 12th floor. Hyun notices that when the monster's body turns red, it is slightly slower. He decides to wait for his body to heal before attacking. The monster turns gray again and then flash steps towards Hyun, but Hyun's body recovers faster and he stabs the monster in the foot that crushed the Molotov and then electrocutes it, setting it on fire. The speed monster leaps back and then swings his flaming foot rapidly to extinguish the flame. We then cut to Sun and a woman named Hyun in a storage room. Hyun asks why Sun did not go through with killing her husband. Sun apologizes, but Hyun is furious because she lost her knife due to Sun's hesitation. Hyun warns her not to fail next time and then leaves. As she exits, she comes face to face with Jisoo. Jisoo enters and then asks to see some phone chargers, and so Sun shows her around. But Jisoo stares at Sun and then mentions that there is blood on her upper lip. She then asks her to roll up her sleeve because that there is probably blood there as well. However, it is revealed that this confrontation only happened in Jisoo's imagination. After she leaves, she finds Jae-hyun and secretly tells him what Hyuk told her earlier. Jisoo worries about how many residents are hiding their infections. Jae-hyun explains that the security guard sealed off the underground parking lot before the outbreak, meaning there should not be any monsters there, and his car should still be safe. He suggests that they could just leave immediately, and Jisoo agrees. Suddenly, Hyuk appears behind them and then asks if they're planning to leave Hyun behind. He tells them that they cannot leave because the parking lot has already been breached by the monsters. Leaving now would just be a suicide mission. Back with Hyun, he hides inside an apartment, searching for a distraction to draw the speed monster away. The speed monster descends the stairs and then realizes that Woo and Yuri are suddenly gone. Then, it hears a loud noise coming from the floor above. When it investigates, it finds Hyun standing at the end of the hallway holding bottles, taunting it to come after him. Meanwhile, Woo rescued Yuri and brings her to safety. Yuri suffers from an asthma attack and uses the last of her inhaler. As she treats Woo's injuries, he blushes, and the two begin to bond. Back with Hyun, the speed monster charges straight at him, unaware that Hyun had set up a wire trap across the hallway. The wire strikes the monster's abdomen, knocking it to the ground, and though it did not cut him, Hyun seizes the opportunity and stabs the monster with a spear, electrocuting it until it gets knocked unconscious. Hyun pours flammable liquid over the monster, but hesitates before lighting the match. Remembering the spider monster that cried out, the parasite begins whispering to him, urging him to finish the job, especially since he had no hesitation killing monsters before. It reminds him that the monsters were once human. Hyun struggles to resist as the parasite then forces his hand to light the match. The parasite briefly takes control of his body and starts to strike the match, but Woo suddenly grabs his arm and then punches him hard in the stomach. Hyun regains consciousness, and Woo tells him that if he's going to kill the monster, he must do it while he's still sane. Hyun thanks him and then ignites the match, killing the speed monster. We then cut to Hyuk and Wen. Wen tells Hyuk that he has been acting rude lately, but he responds that sometimes people have to endure being hated. Wen asks if he believes Hyun will return safely, and Hyuk smirks, saying that he knows Hyun will succeed. It's revealed that he deliberately provoked Hyun to ensure that he would complete the mission and also save the children. Hyun, Woo, and Yuri reach the 14th floor to reunite with Doobadoowop and the children. As everyone greets one another, Hyun asks where Lim is. Doobadoowop shows them Lim in the bathroom. Woo questions whether it's right to leave her like that, but Hyun interrupts and then says that she's actually probably happier now. They explain the plan to Doobadoowop, and he agrees. Woo mentions the large amount of food that he has collected and how difficult it will be to carry everything to the first floor. Hyun adds that traveling in a large group will also be very dangerous. Doobadoowop suggests avoiding the stairs altogether. If he can reach the first floor, then he could restore power to the elevators. The next morning, the men decide to escort Doobadoowop to the first floor, while Yuri stays behind with the children and Lim. Before leaving, Yuri flirts with Woo and then gives him her phone. Hyun says goodbye to Lim and then tells her that her desire is truly beautiful. They reach the first floor and are welcomed back by the residents. Jisoo flirts with Hyun, and Hyuk approaches and asks where the children are. He assumed that Hyun would rescue them, but he guessed he was mistaken. Hyun punches him straight in the face, and as tension rises, Doobadoowop intervenes, stating that the children are safe and that it's time to bring them down using the elevator. Hyun warns that the spider monster escaped through the elevator shaft, but Doobadoowop asks which elevator was used. Hyun and Woo think about it for a sec, and then believe that it was the left one. So Doobadoowop decides to repair the right elevator instead. He restores power to it, and Wen confirms that it's working. However, the elevator suddenly moves up one floor, and then displays a message that it has reached maximum capacity. Meanwhile, Hyun and Jisoo talk about Lim turning into a baby. Jisoo decides to write a song about it, and then begins playing her acoustic guitar. The melody reminds Hyun of his painful past, and he asks her to play something less sad. Back with Wen, she suddenly warns everyone that something is coming. The elevator arrives on the first floor, and when the doors open, the security guard steps out. A woman excitedly greets him, but Wen warns that he's no longer human. The security guard reveals its monstrous form and then immediately kills the woman with a trimmer. Flashbacks reveal that he was constantly mocked and abused for his job, including that woman that he just killed, who once gave him a box of rotten fish. His resentment grew until he transformed. In the present, Jae-hyung charges straight at him, but the security guard knocks him aside and then kills another resident. The monster turns towards Wen as she screams for help. Some residents break into the room where Hyun and Jisoo are, and then they barricade themselves inside. Elsewhere, Hyun becomes trapped in a room with a resident holding a weapon and demands that he gives it to her so she can go and fight. As the security guard prepares to attack Wen, Jae-hyun shouts, "And the Lord said, let there be light," and the monster gets hit with a flashbang. He charges with his shield, tackling the monster, but it does not move. The security guard then punches Jae-hyun into the wall, breaking his ribs. Jae-hyun struggles to reach for his sword as the monster approaches. Inside the barricaded room, Hyun and Jisoo try to leave, but the other residents prevent them. Jae-hyun begins to pray to God, and then envisions Jisoo's face. He tells her that her face will be the last thing that he sees before he dies. The security guard then crushes Jae-hyun's skull, killing him instantly. And at this point in the K-drama, there are a lot of differences going on. One major difference is the relationship of people. For example, the webtoon is hinting at a relationship between Hyun and Jisoo, while also having Woo and Yuri flirting and blushing as well. Now in the K-drama, Hyun doesn't even have anything close to a relationship with Jisoo, but instead Hyun seems to have a relationship with Wen, while Jisoo is having a relationship with Jae-hyun, who
we see is not gonna be a problem in the future now. Another big difference is the involvement with the government. In the K-drama, it's literally the first thing that they show in the series, and it gets explained through the characters that don't even show up in the webtoon. The government is being used as a way to explain the epidemic, which we don't really even need much of an explanation for. I think the webtoon is doing a great job at giving us just the right amount of information we need to know about the epidemic and what's going on. Again, it depends on what you like, but honestly, the military scenes in the show just make me miss what's happening in the apartment building. The series continues with Wen standing frozen in terror. Soap intervenes and shoots the security guard in the shoulder, but it has no effect. He orders Wen to run while he holds off the monster. As the security guard prepares to strike Soap, Soap feels genuine fear for the first time. Wen runs with tears in her eyes, while suddenly, Hyun dashes past her and then turns the corner, blocking the attack meant for Soap. The security guard grabs Hyun's spear and hurls him across the hall. Hyun stands up and sees Jae-hyun's corpse, and he begins to panic. Jisoo enters and reacts in horror as well. The parasite whispers to Hyun, "Didn't you see this coming? You're going to see much more of this now. Now smile." With tears streaming down his face, Hyun slowly begins to smile. Jisoo tries to snap him out of it as the security guard continues attacking. She swings her baseball bat, but the security guard catches it and launches her to the side. The monster then turns his attention to Hyun, who just stands there in shock. However, the security guard doesn't attack him. Hyun turns to face Jisoo, and she thinks his desires are taking over and screams at him to snap out of it. Suddenly, a tentacle bursts through a shelf behind Jisoo. Hyun catches it with a smile and tells her it's alright. The security guard grows enraged and is struck in the foot by an arrow from Soap. In the next instant, Hyun stabs the security guard with the tentacle. He releases it, and the tentacle begins devouring the monster. While Jisoo and Soap launch their own attacks, the tentacle completely drains the security guard, leaving behind nothing but a skeleton. It retracts, and the monster says, "I have what I need." Everyone settles down as the rest of the group enters and then witnesses the aftermath. They burn the body, and some residents begin blaming Doobadoowop for turning on the elevator. But Hyuk changes the subject and asks where the rest of the residents are. We then cut to Hyun holding a bloody dumbbell, having just killed a random resident. Sun then walks in and sees the corpse. The group mourns Jae-hyun's death, and Woo takes a sword in his honor. Later, Jisoo and Hyun have a conversation, revealing that Doobadoowop is fixing the intercom in the security office. They try to cheer each other up, and Hyun thanks Jisoo for helping him avoid fully turning into a monster. She was the voice that he heard in the darkness. Meanwhile, Hyuk helps Wen and realizes that only one monster reacted to all of the noise earlier. He questions whether it might actually be safe outside. Hyuk approaches Hyun and asks him for a huge favor: to go outside and act as bait. Hyun is shocked, but Jisoo responds by headbutting Hyuk and breaking his glasses. Later, Hyun asks Doobadoowop if he can fix their weapon. Doobadoowop says that he can, but he'll need to use the security office. Meanwhile, Kim is losing his mind in the quarantine room. He draws circles on the walls as the parasite inside him speaks. A group of dismembered hands appear, speaking badly about him. Kim begins yelling at both the parasite and the imagined residents. Suddenly, another version of Kim appears in front of him and brutally insults him, telling him to just end his life. The parasite walks away, but Kim begs it to come back. He admits his life is miserable and that he isn't a good person. He falls to his knees, saying that no one would want to live his life. The parasite gives him one more chance, and Kim thanks him through the tears. Kim begins transforming into a monster, and in his monstrous form, it resembles himself but just extremely long hair. He breaks through the door and then goes to attack a random woman, but then suddenly, his wife's son appears. She grabs a piece of wood and demands to know who gave him permission to turn into a monster. Kim tells her to leave him alone, but Sun smashes his head with the wooden board. We flash back a few minutes earlier. Sun asks Hyun to kill her if she ever turned into a monster, and that's when they heard the noise outside. Sun then tells Kim to wake up. The rest of the group arrive, but Hyun tells them not to intervene. Sun asks Kim if he has any last words, and he replies, "I'm sorry." She then repeatedly smashes his head in with the board. Kim apologizes again, saying that he'll try to be a better person. Sun continues beating him until he's dead, bleeding on the ground. Sun drops to her knees, crying that he apologized to her and all she did was kill him. Hyun stays by her side, trying to comfort her. Outside, the tall-tongued monster lays on the ground and is being dragged away by something off-screen. And the only thing heard is a monstrous voice calling out, "Protein." Doobadoowop gets the intercom working, and Woo and Hyun rescue Yuri and the kids from the 14th floor. In the security office, they manage to get the cameras running. They check the footage of the parking lot and they plan to head there next, but they spot 3 monsters that they must kill first. Jisoo doesn't want Hyuk using Hyun as a pawn, but Hyun is already preparing by grabbing gasoline. Hyuk outlines the plan. Hyun, Woo, Jisoo, Soap, and Yuri will gather food and supplies. Doobadoowop will shut off the elevator once the mission is complete and fix the broken gear in the meantime. Jisoo is assigned a special task, collecting a bunch of empty bottles. We then cut to Yuri and Soap preparing several Molotov cocktails when one of the kids tells them that Hyuk wants to hold a meeting. As they leave, someone sneaks in and steals one of the bottles. During the meeting, Hyun explains the plan. They'll lure the monsters out of the parking lot and then use the Molotovs to drive them outside the shutter gate. Once the monsters are out, Doobadoowop will close the gate, and Yuri and Hyuk will extinguish the flames with a fire extinguisher. After the meeting is over, Hyun is in his room when Wen approaches him. She awkwardly tries to make small talk, but she secretly has a crush on him. Hyun asks what her brother is like. She explains that Hyuk was always smart, but was bullied for liking geeky things. When Hyun asks if she's embarrassed by him, she admits that she was, but says that she's still her brother. She might not always like him, but she doesn't hate him, because they're family. Meanwhile, Hyun takes the stolen Molotov and then plans to kill Sun because she's too afraid to wait for her to possibly turn. Just as she's about to light it, the man she thought she killed appears behind her. His nose is bleeding. We flash back to Hyun coming home after being bullied. He tries to give his sister snacks, but before he enters the room, he overhears her angrily telling someone that she doesn't want people to know that she has a brother. In fact, she doesn't even have a brother. Back in the present, Hyun reflects on the meeting of family. Jisoo gives him her phone with a recording of her song. Meanwhile, the man grabs Hyun to stop her. Suddenly, Sun wakes up and then pushes him away. The man realizes that he had turned into a monster, and using that distraction, Sun knocks him out. As things monetarily calm down, Hyun declares that she still has to kill Sun. She kicks Sun towards the monster and then throws the Molotov. Sun catches it midair, and the both of them get into a shouting match. Hyun insists that it's not her fault, and then she tries to shift the blame. The two accuse each other of being cowards just as the rest of the group enters. Confused, the group demands to know what's happening. Hyun shouts that Sun has become a monster. Sun and the transformed man are locked in quarantine as the group prepares to head to the parking lot. On the way down, Hyuk and Hyun bond over Maria from the sky, and eventually they reach the parking lot entrance. They don't hear anything through the phone and assume that it's empty, but Hyun quickly stops them and warns them that it isn't empty, but the monsters are sleeping. The series continues with Hyuk planning to kill the 3 monsters in the parking lot. Woo and Hyun surprisingly agree to help. The group slowly sneaks into the garage while the monsters are asleep. Hyun, Woo, Soap, and Jisoo surround the monsters, and on Hyuk's signal, they throw Molotovs at them, burning them to death. Hyuk puts out the fires thinking that all of the monsters are dead. However, the monster Jisoo killed turned out to be only a cocoon. The creature is actually on top of Jisoo in the ceiling. It comes down and slashes at her. Hyun tries to run in and save Jisoo, but suddenly, the ground beneath him begins to sink. Eyeballs emerge and then tells Hyun that he can't save her, that he can't save anyone. Hyun looks up and sees the rest of the group unconscious on the ground. The parasite then begins to speak to him, saying that he had thought about his question about who he really is. And just as he's about to answer, Hyun stabs himself, snapping out of it. When he looks up, he sees that the group is already saving Jisoo. After the incident, Doobadoowop had already started working on Jaehyung's car. And elsewhere, a man named Byung warns his 2 friends that they're running out of food and then claims that the main group is hoarding all the food that Doobadoowop had for themselves. His friend says that Hyuk wouldn't do that, so Byung storms off. However, it is revealed that Byung overheard a conversation between Woo and Hyuk. Woo reveals that they only have 3 days left of food, though they still haven't touched Doobadoowop's food supply. However, they can't let people know about the supply because it would cause them to stop rationing their food. When Woo asks what will happen if Operation Shopping fails, Hyuk responds that they'll either starve or maybe they'll eat each other. Hyuk goes to Hyun's room and then tells him about the situation, and he explains Operation Shopping. Then he asks about what he thinks about it. Hyun is shocked that he's even being asked, but he wants to know more. Operation Shopping is a trip to a convenience store 300 meters from the apartment building. There is also a grocery store a kilometer away and a hospital about 2.5 kilometers away. But for now, they only want to target the convenience store. Back in the shop, Byung enters in and asks for his morning rations. Woo goes to grab them but realizes that Byung had already received his portion. Byung says that he's just really hungry, but Woo refuses to make any exceptions. Feeling frustrated, Byung pulls out a box cutter and then threatens Woo, but Woo doesn't budge. After a really tense stare-off, Byung drops the knife and instead goes to throw a punch. However, Woo quickly knocks him out with a punch of his own. Byung asks if Operation Shopping would even work, but Woo tells him that they can't really know for sure. Byung then gets up and says that he wants to join the operation. Woo tells him to take better care of his belongings as he hands his knife back. Woo apologizes for punching him, and Byung apologizes for provoking him. Moments later, the electricity in the apartment building goes out, and to make matters worse, they're running out of drinkable water, and Yuri has used the last of her inhaler. Jisoo walks in while everyone is sulking, trying to rouse them up. Meanwhile, Doobadoowop had just finished repairing the armored car. Shortly after, Woo grabs Hyuk by the collar, demanding that they go to the hospital first for Yuri. However, Hyuk thinks that it's not worth it, and insists that they should just go to the convenience store because it's the safest route. Everyone opposes Hyuk's plan, but says that he is not risking everyone's lives just for Yuri. In response, Hyun refuses to participate in the operation entirely, and Woo backs him up. Feeling cornered, Hyuk finally caves in and agrees to go to the hospital. Hyun, Woo, Soap, and Byung get inside the vehicle while Doobadoowop explains its gadgets to Woo. Everyone wishes them good luck, and they start the car and head off. We then get a flashback to when Hyun was in high school. He was playing soccer and he met a new transfer student by the vending machine. Hyun tries to be friendly and invites him to play soccer, but the student says nothing. Hyun then offers him some change for the vending machine, but the student responds coldly saying that Hyun has some nerve. When a soccer ball nearly hits the transfer student, he falls. Hyun reaches out his hand to help him, but that single moment leads to unfortunate events later on. Hyun is constantly bullied by the transfer student and his friends, asking why they would even target him. One day while being bullied, the transfer student mentions that his father owns the company that Hyun's father works at, and then threatens to get him fired. This enrages Hyun, and then he punches and elbows the bully's friends before lunging at the bully himself. However, he stops himself before striking. The bully reveals that he has actually no reason in bullying Hyun, he just does it. And while Hyun will never forgive him for involving his family, the bully knows that Hyun's family won't feel the same way. We see Hyun's father hearing about what happened at school, and he simply tells him to forgive the bully. This causes Hyun to resent his father, and since his mother and sister also did nothing, he began to resent them as well. Eventually, the bully stops targeting Hyun and then moves on to another student. One day, the bully offers to pay for another student's mother's medical bills, but only if the student jumps into oncoming traffic. When Hyun hears about this, he reaches his breaking point. He appears right behind the bully and then pushes him into the street, nearly getting him run over. As a result, Hyun's father loses his job, and the bullied student blames Hyun for his mother's death. Back then, Hyun couldn't do anything, but now it's all different. Before the group can even leave the building's area, the protein monster appears and it smashes into the car. Everyone is knocked unconscious until Hyun wakes up and then gets out. He sees Byung face to face with a monster, and just as it attacks, Hyun pushes Byung out of the way, saving him. Byung runs off and the protein monster squares up with Hyun. Soap then begins throwing bottles of alcohol at the monster to get its attention. The monster leaps and then lands on the car. Soap throws another bottle while Hyun charges in with his spear, but he can't penetrate the monster's skin. The creature grabs Hyun and then launches him into the air, and Hyun lands beside the children's father's corpse, apologizing because he was supposed to bury him. Hearing the commotion, Jisoo and Hyuk prepare to fight. Meanwhile, Woo wakes up, reverses the car, and then uses the two flamethrowers attached to the car to burn the monster. However, it doesn't last long as the car runs out of gas, and the flame goes out. Woo gets out of the car and then prepares to fight as Soap carries Hyun back towards safety. But suddenly, the protein monster leaps behind them and then attacks. Soap pushes Hyun out of the way, telling him that it's not his time yet, before the monster crushes Soap with his fist, killing him. The parasite emerges again, laughing at Hyun and reminding him that he warned them that he would witness a lot of death. Feeling furious, Hyun slowly stands up. However, Jisoo and Hyuk arrive with fire extinguishers and strike the monster's face. Woo joins in and then slices his ankles, while Jisoo strikes it in the head. Hyun then rushes in and then stabs the monster and begins to electrocute it. However, without Molotovs, he struggles to finish it off as he begins to transform. Suddenly, a bus appears and then rams into the protein monster. It reverses and repeatedly crashes into it until it stopped moving. The bus doors open and Byung steps out. As Yuri mourns Soap's death, 4 more people step out of the bus. Woo immediately warns everyone to stay back, that the bus is a prison transport. A man named Shin steps forward and then faces Woo. Woo reveals that the newcomers are all criminals, and Shin confirms that Woo was a detective who arrested him. The group tries to enter the apartment building, but Hyuk steps forward and demands a reason to let them in. But suddenly, Shin grabs Hyuk by the collar and warns them, saying, "One more word and I'll rip your jaws off." So first off, rest in peace to Soap, you will be missed. But I'm currently iffy on the 4 new characters. Shin seems to be like the only one that actually matters in the story, and I think he's the only one that actually even shows up in the K-drama. But fact check me on that because I already stopped watching the series. But I really hope it's not just Shin that plays a huge part in this story. Already third of a quarter into the series and then adding basically 5 new characters is pretty big, pretty risky as well. Woo tells Shin to let Hyuk go, and he does. Before they can discuss whether or not they're allowed in the building, a couple of monsters appear. With no other choice, Woo tells everyone to get inside. The group is given their own corner in the building, as some of the residents question why Byung would even bring them there. Byung explains that he was just running around and the bus happened to be passing by. Some of the residents mourn Soap's death, and one of the criminals named Joe approaches Yuri and gives her an inhaler. Meanwhile, Woo and Shin have a private discussion. Shin points out that they are almost out of food, water, and they have no electricity, and that they even haven't secured most of the floors. Because of that, Shin declares that he's in charge now. He can also tell that some people are turning into monsters, and then asks Woo to bring them all to him for a public execution. Just as things get tense, Hyuk enters the room and asks Shin how they managed to survive this long. Shin refuses to answer, but Hyuk argues that the group owes them for letting them into the apartment building. As Shin walks away, he speaks with one of his men named Lim. Lim informs him that there are 2 infected individuals locked up while one is roaming free. So Shin tells Lim to activate his plan. Meanwhile, Hyung and Jisoo are spending time together, with Jisoo writing a song. Hyung asks her if her music can help someone forget the dead. Jisoo responds that for a long time, she couldn't write anything because someone she deeply cared about took their own life. She says that music may not help you forget the dead, but it can certainly help you remember them. We then cut to Lim speaking to a group of residents about a government safe zone that they once went to, only to be kicked out for being criminals. Lim says that he didn't plan for any of this, but is happy now to be with such kind people. People kind enough to allow infected individuals in their group. He then talks about a small church group that also welcomed infected people. They were kind and even gave them food, but they were ultimately wiped out by a monster. Meanwhile, Hyun is alone in his room when Shin walks in. Shin says that he knows Hyun is a monster, but he isn't gonna hurt him. Instead, he wants Hyun to join them. Back with Lim, a major argument breaks out among the residents over whether or not they should expel the infected. Lim leaves the room and then speaks with another criminal named Beck, telling him that the plan worked. Beck loads his gun and then begins heading towards the room, but is stopped by Hyuk and Woo. Beck points his gun at Woo, but Hyuk warns that if he pulls the trigger, it will attract every monster nearby. Hyuk explains that he's been thinking about how they managed to survive this long, and he has 2 main theories. First, he believes it could be a government experiment, and his second theory involves Shin visiting Hyun. Back in Hyun's room, Shin explains that he plans to take over the apartment building by eliminating the infected and the monsters, and then setting up a generator. Hyun admits that the plan sounds good, but he still refuses to join them. Shin grabs Hyun by the collar, but Hyun tells him that he can't kill him, which Shin agrees with, as someone else enters the room. Hyuk then reveals his second theory. He explains that the bus doesn't have a single scratch on it, despite everything that they've encountered, and that they didn't even flinch when they saw the giant monster. And the reason is that because they have a monster of their own. The mysterious man who entered the room is revealed to be Joe, and he begins choking Hyun as it's revealed that Joe is half monster. Back with the others, Beck nearly pulls the trigger, but the rest of the residents arrive and interrupt the situation. Everything stops, and Lim suggests that they should check on the two infected to decide whether or not they should be expelled or put out of their misery. Back with Hyun, Shin wants to see Hyun's full strength, but Joe nearly kills him, forcing Shin to tell him to stop. Feeling disappointed, Shin walks away and then tells Hyun to think about joining them. Meanwhile, Lim and the residents unlock the door to the infected room, and Beck breaks in. Inside though, they find Sun lying on the ground and Jae missing, and a large hole in the ceiling. Yuri enters and tries to talk to Sun. When Sun wakes up, she explains what happened. Jae began panicking about dying, and he began transforming into a monster, saying that he could have been a star. He knocked her down and then escaped through the ceiling. Shin enters the room and then asks for the gun. Beck hands it over, and Shin immediately strikes him for not using it. Shin then throws Hyuk aside and then points the gun at Sun. Just before he can pull the trigger, Hyun enters and says that she promised Sun that she would be the one to kill her. Shin mocks her, questioning whether she really thinks he would hand over the gun, and then he shoots Sun point blank in the head, saying, "You think I was born yesterday?" Meanwhile, Doobadoowop is in the parking garage when he is approached by the last criminal in the group named Sol. Doobadoowop asks if they were responsible for the gunshot, and Sol confirms it, but says that they didn't kill a monster. Doobadoowop then points his gun at Sol. Back of the group, Jisoo punches Shin in the face, but he doesn't even flinch. Shin attempts to hit her back, but Woo intervenes, and the two begin trading punches. As the fight escalates, Hyuk shouts that the monsters are likely on their way, and they soon hear something approaching. Suddenly, the spider monster crashes through the elevator doors. As the residents flee, the monster charges at Shin, but is caught by Joe. Joe swings the creature around, but the spider burns his arm with acid. It attempts to attack again, but Shin tackles Joe out of the way. Shin calls for gasoline, and Lim arrives with it, but hesitates in fear upon seeing the monster. Woo steps in and attacks the creature with the sword, and meanwhile, Hyun hears the gunshot and prepares to go downstairs. However, he hears something else coming from the room next to him. A monster emerges with a massive face on his chest. Back in the infected room, green ooze begins dripping from the hole in the ceiling onto Sun's corpse. The green ooze creature then appears. The face creature approaches Hyun and asks, "How do I look?" Hyun is confused, which angers the creature. Suddenly, Hyun experiences a severe headache, but the creature calms down, and the pain disappears. Hyun realizes that the monster is actually Jae. Jae asks again if he looks good. Hyun tells him that he looks handsome, which makes Jae extremely happy, and he walks away. Hyun wants to kill the monster, but is constantly reminded that it is still Jae, a human. He tries to leave, but Jae suddenly reappears behind him and then asks again if he looks good. Back with Woo, the spider monster grabs the sword and then throws it. Joe picks it up and with a sinister expression begins brutally slashing and crushing the creature over and over. Shin reveals that it has woken up again, as we see a flashback of Joe driving the bus and enjoying killing the protein monster. The only way to stop him is for Shin to command him. Shin places his hand on Joe's shoulder, and Joe immediately returns to normal. As Lim sets the spider monster on fire, Shin declares that they just saved everyone and will continue to protect them, but not for free. Suddenly, something catches Shin's attention. Sun is walking out of the room, and Shin turns and shoots her multiple times in the chest as green ooze drips from her body. Sun asks if they can see her, and then begins vomiting green ooze. She screams, prompting Job to grab her, but the green ooze creature bursts out of her body and attaches itself to the ceiling. Shin aims his gun, but Hyuk tells everyone to stop. The creature asks if they could see it, and Hyuk responds that they can, adding that it isn't right to take over people's bodies. The green ooze creature then runs away, and Hyuk realizes that it sounds just like a child playing hide and seek. However, Shin doesn't care whether it's harmless or not. Monsters must die. Lim sprays it down with gasoline, and Beck throws a lit match at it. As the creature screams in agony, we see a flashback showing a mother playing hide and seek with her child. During the game, the child begins bleeding from his nose, and suddenly, the death monster kills the child's mother right in front of him as he desperately tries to stay hidden. The child remains hidden as the infection takes over, and he becomes the green ooze. Back with Hyun, he gets scared of Jae's monster, but tells him that he's handsome again, and Jae walks away happy. Hyun runs away, but Jae turns around and then gets angry again. Jae jumps to the ceiling and then starts crawling towards Hyun. Hyun gets another massive headache, and due to the pain, he stabs Jae in the eyeball and electrocutes him. Hyun apologizes to Jae as he kills him. Back in the lobby, Lim says that they are now in control, since the residents don't have any food or electricity, while they have plenty of food and a generator. Lim says that the only reason the residents were able to survive this long was because of pure luck. He then draws a line on the ground and then says that if anyone wants to join them, they should just cross over. Suddenly, Hyun appears and then crosses the line, saying that they're not in a different league from them. We see that it was a lot harder for Hyun to kill Jae than we thought. The parasite was even speaking to him, saying that out of all of the people left around them, more will turn into monsters, and that he has to get used to things like this. Hyun says that they have forgotten that the monsters used to be people as well. Jisoo then walks up to Hyun and then tries to snap him out of it, but Hyun admits to murdering Jae. He cries on Jisoo's shoulder as he counts all of the people who have died in the group, and how he tried to forget it all. Hyun then admits to everyone that he was supposed to end his own life today. Jisoo then snaps him out of it for real, saying that he didn't even have a choice to kill Jae. But then, Beck cuts in and tells Hyun to just man up. This sparks multiple fights and arguments, and eventually, Jisoo just walks out of the area, while Hyun decides to stay on the criminal side. Hae-in and another resident decides to join them as well. Beck points his gun at the rest and then says that it's time to make a deal. Back with Dusik, he is being choked up by Sol, but before he can pass out, Bae-young knocks Sol out with a plank of wood. Bae-young warns Dusik that the criminals are trying to take over the apartment building. We then cut to Shin talking with Hyuk and Woo in the office. Shin tells him that they're going to kill everyone who is infected. He asks Hyuk what his plan is, but Woo says that their escape plan already failed. However, Shin knows that Hyuk was planning something else, though Hyuk refuses to say. We then see a flashback of Hyuk and Hyun bonding over Maria from the sky, where Hyuk notices the very long rope that the children's father tried to use. Back in the present, Beck holds Woo and Hyuk at gunpoint and then takes them somewhere. Meanwhile, Dusik shows Byung their secret weapon, and they discuss hiding it somewhere safe. But suddenly, Shin and Lim enter the parking garage and ask why Sol is tied up to a pillar. Dusik says that Sol was being very rude to him, so Shin unties Sol, but then punches him in the face, saying that he was supposed to be respectful. Shin then asks what the box on the back is, and then goes to check it out. We cut to Jisoo searching for Hyun, but she is ignored by the residents who joined the criminals. One of Byung's friends tells her that Hyun went upstairs with Jo to eliminate the monsters. We see Jo and Hyun moving through different floors, arguing about whether killing monsters is the right thing to do. Jo calls Hyun a hypocrite and asks if he has ever known someone who was killed by a monster. Hyun says that he knows a lot of people, naming Jae-hyung, Soap, but then he remembers Sun's baby form in the bathroom. Jo senses that Hyun is hiding something and then asks if there are still monsters around. Jo grabs Hyun by the throat and then demands to know if there are any more monsters. When Hyun refuses to answer, Jo decides to ask the monster inside him instead. Jo tightens his grip as Hyun's parasite appears and then begins communicating with Jo's. Hyun's parasite asks why he should help him, but Jo's parasite suggests that doing so will make Hyun suffer, and Hyun's parasite agrees. Jo learns about the baby monster hidden in the apartment 1408, but Hyun kicks him in the chest, forcing him to release his grip. Jo reaches out to attack again, but Hyun dodges and then runs away into a stairway. Jo tries to grab him again but misses, and Hyun stabs his spear into Jo's arm and electrocutes him. Leaving the spear lodged into his arm, Hyun goes to punch Joe in the face. However, Joe isn't stunned and then goes to attempt to punch Hyun. But just as he's about to strike, his monster arm reverts back to human form, and Hyun takes the opportunity to knock him out with a punch. Back with Shin, he opens the box and finds a pile of tied up blankets and clothes to a rope. Joe eventually returns to normal and then asks if the baby monster is actually safe. Hyun says that she is, but Joe still has his doubts. If Shin finds out about the baby monster, he would freak out, especially since he hates monsters after they slaughtered his whole family. Joe suggests that they go to the apartment so Hyun can check on the monster himself. We then cut to Hyuk and Woo tied up together in a room. Hyuk reveals that he does have another plan, though it's very random. He explains the plan, but Woo thinks it's too crazy. Hyuk then asks about the criminals and whether Woo has ever killed anyone. Woo says no, but Hyuk suggests that they might have to kill the criminals. Back with Hyun, he and Joe arrive at the apartment. Hyun goes inside to check out Sun, but instead of a giant baby, he finds a massive cocoon. He panics, causing Joe to enter and see it as well. Hyun presses his ear against it and then hears a heartbeat, confirming that it is alive. They argue about whether to destroy the cocoon, but Joe shoves Hyun aside and attempts to break it with his monster arm. Suddenly, he is unable to move. His arm refuses to attack, as if it's protecting the cocoon. Joe then tries to spray it with gas, but the monster arm turns against him and then knocks him unconscious. Back in the parking garage, Shin ignores the rope-filled box and instead takes the shield that Jae-hyung once used. He forces Doo-sik to create more shields like this, and then threatens to kill Hyuk if he refuses. After Shin leaves, Byung asks about the rope tied with clothes. Doo-sik explains that the rope is 100 meters long, and if they can't travel on the ground, then they will go through the sky. Back with Hyuk, Woo is shocked by what Hyuk said, but Hyuk brushes it off, saying that he was just thinking. Suddenly, blood begins to pour out from his nose, and he collapses. As Woo shouts for him to wake up, Baek hears the noise and then enters the room. We cut back to Hyun in the apartment as he tries to stab the cocoon, but ultimately, he can't bring himself to do it. At that moment, Jisoo enters and is shocked by what she sees. She insists that they must destroy the cocoon since they don't even know what will happen if they leave it. Jisoo tells Hyun that everyone who has died did so for them to survive, meaning that they have a responsibility to stay alive. She sprays the cocoon with gas and then asks Hyun for the spear, saying that she will be the one to destroy it. However, when she tries, she can't do it either. Suddenly, Joe wakes up and declares that they will die soon, like the monsters as well. He throws a lighter at the cocoon, setting it on fire. As it burns, nearby monsters become aggravated, and he begins rushing towards the building. Baek enters the room where Hyuk and Woo are, and demands to know what they're shouting about. Woo casually says that Hyuk just fell asleep, and it says that he doesn't need to be restrained like this. Baek doesn't believe him, but Woo continues provoking him, until Baek finally removes his restraints and then prepares to fight. Baek lands a punch, but Woo uses his weight to tackle him to the ground, knocking him unconscious. Back in Sun's apartment, Joe and Hyun put on earphones as they hear monsters approaching. One monster begins pounding on the door, and Joe prepares to confront it, while Hyun and Jisoo stay back. Suddenly, another monster crashes through the window and then grabs Jisoo. Hyun grabs onto her spiked bat and then tries to pull her back inside. Joe stabs the monster at the door but leaves Hyun to handle the situation alone. Hyun struggles to pull Jisoo back, but she tells him that it's okay and then knocks his hand away. However, Hyun grabs her again and then stabs the monster with a spear, electrocuting both the creature and Jisoo. The monster releases her and Hyun rushes to wake her up. Jisoo regains consciousness and Hyun hugs her tightly, asking why she would even risk herself like that. However, the flying monster is still alive, so Hyun prepares to fight it. We then cut back to Woo carrying Hyuk on his shoulders. Hyuk tells Woo to check the criminal's bus. So Woo climbs out the window and then down onto the bus's roof. He breaks inside, and then he finds no food and no generator, realizing that the criminals have been lying this entire time. However, something does catch his eye. A cooler. Woo opens it, and inside is something that completely shocks him. I did say in part 3 that I stopped watching the K-drama, and I really did mean it. However, I decided to pick it back up for the finale, So here are the quick but big differences in the series so far. 1. Jae-hyung dies in the K-drama after the attack with the protein monster outside, while Jae-hyung in the webtoon dies a lot earlier. Jisoo in the K-drama has to get surgery for her appendix, which will kill her if untreated, which basically adds like another layer of like drama to their escape mission. The attack of the protein monster is also very different. Not only does Soap not die in it, but Soap was going to sacrifice himself not because he thought it was his time to help Hyun, but instead because he was turning into a monster. And instead of the criminals saving them, it was actually the original character who is now associated with the military plot. Not only that, but they actually succeeded in the mission and they brought back clean water and some food. And now with the inclusion of the original character, it changes the finale from the group trying to survive the criminals like in the webtoon to the military now trying to hunt down Hyun and the group. And the biggest difference from the K-drama and the webtoon is honestly the criminals, as the group isn't really shown in the show except for Shin, Jo, and Sol. And instead of being criminals, they're a military group who takes over the apartment. Jo also has like a whole different name and a whole different role in the show, but they're also not very fleshed out compared to the webtoon, and they only appear in like 2 episodes of the series compared to the webtoon, which has them around 60 to 70 chapters of the series. There are a lot of differences that heavily affect the series and the K-drama, but we'll just have to navigate through the webtoon to find the rest. The series continues with Hyun and Jisoo running out of the apartment and shutting the door on the flying monster. Hyun stabs the door and then shocks it, knocking out the flying monster. Hyun and Jisoo notice a blood trail coming from Jo, but they ignore it and decide to go downstairs to help Woo and Hyuk. Meanwhile, Hyuk joins Woo in the prison bus, where Woo tells him that the criminals lied about having food. The only thing inside the bus is coolers filled with chopped up human parts. Woo assumes that the criminals are eating humans, but Hyuk realizes that they're not eating the meat, they're using it as bait for the monsters. That means if things go wrong, they might end up in those coolers as well. Suddenly, Hyuk tells Woo to get down as a horde of monsters begin emerging from the forest. We cut to Jo heading up to the roof of the building, but as he opens the door, he sees a naked woman standing on the ledge. The woman turns around and then locks eyes with Jo, but a monster appears right behind them. Meanwhile, Beck wakes up and demands to know where Woo is from one of the residents. He becomes furious and beats the resident who let them escape. Back outside, Woo and Hyuk are now surrounded by the monsters. However, the monsters don't seem interested in the bus and instead head towards the front entrance of the building. As they begin banging on the gate, Woo decides to act as a decoy and grabs a cooler. Hyuk thinks that the plan is insane and he tries to stop him, but Woo suddenly turns and then punches Hyuk in the stomach, telling him that he'll see him soon. He calls out to the monsters, drawing their attention, and they begin chasing him. Woo runs into an alley where he encounters a roly-poly monster that charges straight at him. He dodges it, and then continues running into the woods. While running, Woo crashes into something, a giant cocoon. Then he realizes that there are actually 4 cocoons. One of them had stopped hatching halfway, with something inside trying to emerge. Suddenly, more monsters appear, forcing Woo to hide in a tree. As he watches, one of the cocoons begins to shake. Back with Beck, Shin enters and learns what happened with Woo and Hyuk. Lim wakes up all the residents. One of the residents suggests that if they work together, they can stop the monsters. But suddenly, Shin grabs the man's head and says, "Don't you want to be a hero?" before snapping his neck. Shin then orders Beck to chop up the resident and then throw their bodies outside to distract the monsters. At that moment, Hyun and Jisoo walk in and witness everything. Hyun charges in to stab Shin, but Shin catches the spear and then punches Hyun. Shin then grabs Jisoo and then holds her hostage, threatening to kill her. Beck starts to question Shin's actions, but suddenly, Hyuk comes from behind and then smashes Shin in the head with Jisoo's bat, knocking him out. Hyuk then asks Hyun if these people are actually humans or monsters, before concluding that they must be monsters. He pulls out his gun and then he points it at Shin, saying, "Which means it doesn't matter if we kill them." Shin doesn't believe him, pointing out that if he fires it, it will attract every monster nearby. We then get a flashback to an orphanage where Hyuk and his younger sister are abandoned by their father. Later, the news reports that their father has died. Back in the present, Hyuk says that the adults always think that they know everything, but in reality, they don't know nothing. He prepares to pull the trigger, but Hyun stops him by reminding him about the final episode of the theatrical cut of their favorite anime, Maria from the Sky. Hyuk calms down, and at that moment, a monster suddenly breaks through the gate and impales Beck. Meanwhile, Joe is still on the roof with the mysterious woman. He swipes at the monster behind him, but when he turns back, the woman had vanished. Back with Woo, he climbs down from the tree and then looks at the cocoon. He sees what appears to be a corpse and remarks that he could have sworn he saw a person inside. Back in the lobby, the remaining residents gather as Beck bleeds out on the ground. The monsters continue trying to break into the building. Hyun shouts at Hyuk to barricade the gate, but Hyuk's nose begins to bleed as he starts hearing voices. Hyun tells him to snap out of it and reminds him that he's the leader. Hyuk regains control and then orders everyone to move to the second floor, declaring that the first floor is a lost cause. Hyuk then tells Jisoo to go with Hyun and take Wen and the children upstairs while he goes to find Doobadoowop. As the monsters begin breaking in, Shin regains consciousness and then throws a corpse at one of them. He tells Lim that he has the bus key and that they're going to escape. On another floor, Saul finishes looking at dirty magazines and then walks into the hallway. He turns around and he sees the naked woman, but instead of being afraid, Saul becomes excited and then asks if she's a monster. He then makes inappropriate advances towards her, but suddenly, the flying monster appears behind them. Back with the group, Shin punches Ji, sending her crashing into a wall. Yuri yells for Ji to hurry, but a monster grabs Ji and then drags her away, killing her. Meanwhile, Hyuk finds Doobadoowop and Byung and informs them of what's happening. Doobadoowop wonders how they'll get their secret weapon to the roof, while Byung questions what the plan even is. Hyuk explains that there's a 80-meter gap between the building and a hill with a concrete wall in between. Doobadoowop had created a harpoon gun that can connect the roof to the hill using a rope. The problem is that they don't know if the rope can support their weight or if it will break, which is why it's only the last resort. Hyuk also reveals that he's been observing the monsters and noticed that they don't go up the hill, making it a safe zone. Additionally, there's an apartment complex and a supermarket nearby, increasing their chances of survival. Back with Seoul, he is being devoured by the flying monster, but upon looking closer, blood begins to drip from his nose. Meanwhile, Wen is hiding in a bathroom when Hyun finds her and rescues her, while Jisoo retrieves the children. Back with Yuri, she calls out to Hyun, telling her to stop going upstairs and join them on the second floor. Hyun refuses, saying that the monsters will eventually reach the second floor, so it's better to go as high as possible. Yuri warns her that the upper floors aren't safe, but Hyun ignores her and then runs off. Hyun reaches the 11th floor and then sees a pool of blood. She realizes that no one followed her and her phone is about to die. As she tries to leave, Seoul suddenly appears with his arm missing. Excited to see her, it's revealed that the flying monster stopped eating Seoul once his nose started to bleed. Seoul begins twitching as his arm regenerates, but Hyun knocks him down, interrupting his transformation. Seoul asks her for one final favor since they're going to die anyways, but she refuses. Hyun calls him a rapist and then begins strangling him, saying it's the perfect moment to kill someone who is turning into a monster. She chokes him until he stops moving, but just as she thinks he's dead, Seoul punches her in the face. He gets back up, unbuckles his pants and then pins her down. Suddenly, an arrow strikes Seoul in the shoulder and Yuri hits him in the head with a shield. Meanwhile, Hyun and Wen regroup with Jisoo and the children in the hallway, but there are still monsters in the lobby. Wen asks for Hyun's phone and sets a 10-second alarm. When it reaches 4 seconds, she throws the phone into the center of the lobby. The alarm distracts the monsters, giving the group a chance to escape. Back with Shin and Lim, they prepare to leave the prison bus, but Woo suddenly appears. He tells them that he saw something strange and demands the keys so he can block the entrance. Back with Doobadoowop, he decides to stay behind, knowing that they won't be able to carry him along with everyone else. Instead of arguing, Hyuk simply asks if he will be okay, and then promises to come back for him. As the monsters begin breaking through the parking garage, Doobadoowop tells them to run. Woo and Shin then begin to fight, trading heavy blows. Shin gains the upper hand and then kicks Woo towards the window, but Woo secretly steals the bus keys. Back with Hyun and Yuri, they tie up Seoul. Hyun suggests killing him for good, and Seoul laughs, not believing that they'll do it. But suddenly, he sees the naked woman standing down the hallway. Meanwhile, Woo punches Shin in the stomach and then throws him out of the bus. Shin gets back up and then shouts at Woo, attracting a monster. The creature spits green venom onto Shin, burning his face and upper body. Back on the second floor, Hyun notices that no one is there, and then tells Jisoo and the others to go up higher and find any remaining survivors. Wen refuses to let Hyun go alone, but Hyuk suddenly arrives with the weapon. Byung tells him that they need to reach the roof, but Hyung asks about Dusik. We then cut to Dusik in the parking garage, facing the monsters breaking through the gate. A flashback shows Dusik receiving an award for saving a child, an act that cost him his leg, but cost his wife and child to leave him. He reflects on whether he would have been happier if he hadn't lost his leg. Then he thinks about Hyun and how saving those kids made him really happy. As the monsters break in, Dusik says that he has no regrets. Blood begins to drip from his nose and he raises his gun to his head, but suddenly, his missing leg suddenly regenerates. He laughs, realizing that his deepest desire was to walk again. Dusik stands up, throws a gas canister at the monsters, and then shoots it, causing a massive explosion. Back with Hyun, Sol screams that the naked woman is a monster. Yuri believes that the woman is a human, but Hyun disagrees. As the woman approaches, Hyun grabs Yuri's crossbow and then warns her to stop. The woman just keeps on walking, and Hyun shoots her in the head. She collapses. Hyun calls for fire, but Yuri says that they don't need it because the woman isn't moving. Yuri checks and confirms that the woman is dead, meaning that she was human, and that Hyun just killed an innocent person. Sol begins laughing hysterically. Hyun then turns to Sol and then puts the blame on him and slashes his neck open. Hyun then turns to Yuri and insists that both the woman and Sol were monsters. She raises her knife towards Yuri and then asks why she's looking at her like that. Yuri tells Hyun to calm down, but Hyun is afraid that Yuri will tell the others what she did. Hyun suddenly charges forward, and it seems like she stabbed Yuri in the chest. We cut back to Hyun and Hyuk as they hear the explosion from the parking garage. Hyun immediately runs downstairs while Hyuk yells at him to stop. Hyun reaches the first floor and then sees a monster breaking through. Hyuk tells Hyun that Dusik was turning into a monster himself, but Hyun refuses to leave him behind and then kicks a monster straight through a wall. Hyun reaches the parking lot and then finds flames everywhere. He finds Dusik lying on the ground and tries to lift him up. Dusik tells him that he's turning into a monster and that Hyun should leave. But Hyun refuses to abandon him. Dusik can't believe that his greatest desire was to simply have his leg back. Even his own family left him, so he truly appreciates Hyun coming back for him. Dusik begins to cry, saying that he wanted to go out like a man, but Hyun came back and made him cry instead. He tells Hyun to stay alive and that he's too important to die. He says that whatever Hyun did to end up alone in this apartment building, it wasn't his fault. Hyun then tells Dusik about his family, and Dusik realizes that Hyun was in even more pain than he was. As Dusik thinks about his family, his final words are, "I miss my family," before he dies in Hyun's arms. Hyun breaks down, crying over Dusik's body as the flames around him grow stronger. Back with Hyun, it's revealed that she didn't stab Yuri, and Yuri slaps Hyun, snapping her out of it. Suddenly, Sol gets back up and then puts Hyun in a chokehold and then screams that he's going to kill her. Sol bites Hyun's ear, but Jisoo appears and then smashes his head with her bat. Sol's body begins to fail and he collapses, bleeding out and dying. Hyuk looks at the corpse of the naked woman and is surprised that there was another survivor roaming around. Hyun tries to claim that the woman wasn't human, but Yuri corrects her and says that she was human and that Hyun killed her. Hyuk says that it doesn't matter right now because the monsters are on their way. Wen warns everyone that the monsters are rapidly climbing up the stairs, and then we cut back to Hyun mourning Dusik when suddenly a naked man appears right behind them. Hyun points his spear at the man, but the man speaks saying, "We've been waiting so long, now our time has finally come." Hyun can't tell if the man is a human or a monster, but the man grabs him, and suddenly Hyun wakes up inside his apartment. He looks outside and realizes that he's in another hallucination. When he turns around, he sees his parasite observing everything. The parasite explains that the moment that the man touched Hyun, he finally understood everything. Every human being has a desire, no matter how big or small, but not all desires are good. Most of them destroy not only people, but everything around them. He calls it a revolution. That man was able to satisfy his desires for what he felt like eternity. And in the process, the parasite realized the truth, that they aren't parasites or viruses at all. They are human souls. Hyun tries to stab his own soul, but it catches the attack. His soul becomes ecstatic, saying that they are finally one, and then invites Hyun to enter a new, evolved world without desire, division, or destruction. Hyun punches his soul, declaring that he will still remain himself, but suddenly, there's a knock at the door, and it's his mother calling out to him. His soul tells him that even though he hates his family, a part of him still misses them. If he opens the door, he can start all over with them. His soul urges him to open the door and return to his sweet home. We then cut back to Woo. Shin is now completely blind and deaf, but he tackles a monster in front of him and tries to escape, shouting that he can't die like this. But suddenly, a long tongue appears and then wraps around Shin. It lifts him up in the air and then drags him into the woods. Woo quickly starts the bus and then uses it to block the entrance. We see Joe on the roof watching everything unfold when he suddenly senses something approaching. When he turns around, he sees nothing, until the flying monster appears right behind them. Meanwhile, Hyuk and the group are rushing up the stairs, and Hyuk points out how strange it is that there are so many monsters appearing at once. Jisoo suggests that it might be because they disturbed something important to them, as we see monsters gathering around the dead naked woman. Jisoo tells the group about the cocoon that they found and how Joe burned it. Hyuk asks if the cocoon was large enough for a person to fit inside. Suddenly, a monster appears, forcing the group to continue running upstairs. On the roof, Joe is getting sliced apart by the flying monster. He tries to fight back, but the monster keeps dodging his attacks. Joe takes cover just before the monster slices through the concrete wall. Back with Hyun, he tells his soul that his family ignored him at his lowest point, and even though his soul agrees, it points out that doesn't mean that Hyun doesn't love them. Hyun reaches for the door but ultimately decides not to open it, realizing that there are still people he needs to protect. He breaks free from the hallucination and then punches the naked man in the face. The man doesn't react though. He has no emotions. He can't feel any emotions. But then he asks, "What about you? Are you sure you can handle what's about to happen?" Hyun then turns around and sees Doobadoowop fully transformed into a monster. Meanwhile, Woo is fighting off creatures trying to break into the bus. He grabs a shield and it protects Lim while pushing through the horde. Hyun demands to know if the man is responsible for what happened to Doobadoowop, but the man replies that it was Doobadoowop's own choice. Hyun tries to stab him, but Doobadoowop suddenly leaps forward and then kicks Hyun in the back. The naked man wishes Hyun good luck and then disappears. Hyun gets back up as his soul speaks to him again, asking if he really wants to destroy Doobadoowop's happiness. Doobadoowop begins to laugh just as Doobadoowop leaps towards him again. However, Hyun dodges the attack and apologizes to Doobadoowop as he prepares to strike. But suddenly, Woo tackles Doobadoowop to the ground with his shield. Woo tells Hyun to stay back and let the adults handle it. Hyun insists that Doobadoowop is still alive inside, but Woo refuses to believe that Doobadoowop would want this. He asks Hyun that if this is happiness, then why are they still trapped in this nightmare? Doobadoowop kicks Woo's shield, but Woo pushes him off, hits him with a flashbang, and then tackles Doobadoowop into the flames. Woo stabs him in the chest until Doobadoowop finally dies. Woo walks over to Hyun and then tries to comfort him, explaining that in a world where people are constantly dying, saving one person often means sacrificing another. As Woo speaks, we see Jisoo lying on the floor of her apartment. Instead of following the group, she decides to stay back and apologize to them. As she enters her apartment, she repeats a phrase her ex-boyfriend once told her: "Even the blackest darkness vanishes in the faintest light." Back on the roof, Joe decides to let his soul take control of his body. His arm transforms into a gun and he shoots the flying monster's wing, causing it to fall. As it's falling, Joe punches it in the face and then sends it flying. At that moment, the group reaches the rooftop. They exchange information and Joe says that he will buy them time for their plan. However, one of the children realizes that they are missing a person, and Hyuk notices that is Jisoo. Joe says that they can't go back because the monsters are already charging towards them. He senses the overwhelming number of monsters and he starts to lose count. Yuri joins Joe in preparing to fight, while Hyun and Woo race up the stairs to meet them. Back with Jisoo, she finds her amped and prepares for one final performance. As Joe and Yuri brace themselves to face the horde, Jisoo plays her bass at full volume, drawing the monsters towards her. The monsters rush to her apartment and they begin banging on the door. Hyun realizes what Jisoo is doing, and he sprints up the stairs at incredible speed and reaches his old apartment, which is just below hers. Meanwhile, on the roof, Joe and the others continue fighting off the remaining monsters, while Hyuk and Byung work at the harpoon. Hyuk finishes it and then fires it towards the hill. successfully securing the line. Jo, Yuri, and even Hyun manage to eliminate the remaining monsters. Hyuk tells everyone to hurry because the base had stopped playing. Back in her apartment, Jisoo arms herself with her base, ready to fight as the monsters break in. Suddenly, Hyun crashes through her window. Jisoo is happy to see Hyun, but Hyun appears to be almost fully transformed. We cut back to the roof where Wen and Yuri prepare to use the harpoon with the kids. Hyuk explains that there are only 3 handles, meaning that there are only 1 left for the rest of them. Hyun immediately asks for the last handle. Everyone agrees, but Hyun specifically asks if Hyuk is okay with it, and he doesn't respond. Yuri goes first and Hyuk gives her a quick pep talk before she goes. Yuri grabs the rope and then slides down using the handle. The rope stretches out, and Yuri and one of the kids make it safely across. Wen and the other child go next. Just before they fully slide off, Hyuk tells Wen, "Take care." They make it across safely, but Wen, with tears in her eyes, realizes what Hyuk meant. Jo tells the group that Hyuk has been holding on to his humanity for a while, but he'll soon turn. Hyuk admits that if he goes with them, he'll put everyone in danger, which is why he's staying behind. Before Hyuk leaves, Hyun asks him why he's acting so brave and then tells him to stop acting like his life doesn't matter. As Hyuk turns to leave, Hyun thanks him for helping her survive even though she's weak. She grabs the handle and then begins sliding down. We flash back to her past, where she was a snitch in school and became an outcast because of it. And now, she promises that if she makes it out, she'll apologize to everyone and become brave and kind. However, before she can make it across, the flying monster slices her midair and she falls to her death. Yuri, Wen, and the kids hide in the trees while Jo tells Byung to make noise. Byung shouts, drawing the flying monster's attention. He stands still as it approaches, and at the last second, Jo grabs the monster, slams it to the ground, and then launches it into the air. Byung then grabs the rope and then slides down safely. Back with Jisoo, the monsters break into the apartment. Hyun stabs 2 monsters with his spear, but suddenly begins remembering the hateful comments that he used to leave online towards random celebrities. Hyun starts to believe that he may have contributed to the end of the world. His soul responds saying that no one truly knows. It tells him to act quickly though, or else he'll die. Hyun wants to save everyone, but his soul explains that it's impossible, because once he's fully transformed, he'll see humans as enemies. However, he might be able to save one person, Jisoo. It won't last long, but Hyun could remain conscious for a brief moment even after becoming a monster. Hyun doesn't believe him, but it's either that or die. His soul tells him to open the door. Hyun then walks towards the door, returning to reality, when suddenly a gunshot rings out. The monsters turn around and it's Hyuk holding a gun. Moments earlier, Hyuk had been running down the stairs when he realizes that he was stuck in a loop. He then hears someone approaching. It's his father, badly beaten. His father asks if Hyuk abandoned Wen just like he abandoned them. He tells Hyuk that Wen must resent him the same way that he resents his own father. Suddenly, Hyuk gets punched in the face, but it turns out to be Lim. Lim asks Hyuk what's happening on the roof, but Hyuk is too stunned to respond. Hyuk says that everything is ready for their escape and tells them to come quickly. We then see Woo crouched behind a wall, watching the monsters banging on Jisoo's door, when suddenly Hyuk appears behind them. That's when Hyuk fires the gun. Using the distraction, Hyun pins 2 monsters against the wall and then electrocutes them with his spear. Jisoo, Woo, and Hyuk then eliminate the remaining monsters on the floor. Hyun begins laughing while shocking the monsters, but suddenly, his spear runs out of battery. One monster swings at him, but Hyun catches the punch. Another tries to stab him with his tongue, but Hyun catches it with his mouth. Hyun then kicks both monsters to the wall, and even though those monsters are defeated, and Hyun has fully transformed, more monsters continue pouring in and surround the group. Just as they charge in, Jo arrives and then joins the fight, throwing the monsters out of the window. Meanwhile, Shin is shown bleeding out in the woods when the naked woman appears beside them. She praises him for defeating a monster as a human, but says that he wasn't chosen, meaning that he will die a human. A monster approaches, and then she asks Shin if he wants to live, even if it means becoming a monster. Back with the group, they finish off the remaining monsters. Jo tells everyone that they need to get to the roof, but Hyuk refuses, saying that he's already turning. However, Woo ignores him and then drags him up the stairs anyways, while Hyuk yells that he wanted a cooler exit. Hyuk says that his little sister will be fine without him, but Hyun tells him that whether you live or die, families are meant to stay together. The group reaches the roof. Joe warns them to hurry because they don't know when the flying monster will return. Just as they're about to escape, both Joe and Hyun sense something terrifying. Behind Lim, a massive figure appears. Shin has fully transformed into a monster. Shin immediately grabs Lim and then throws him off the building, killing him. Woo tries to slash Shin, but Shin snaps the sword in half with his arm. Shin swings at Woo, but he dodges. Joe attempts to restrain Shin, but he's too weak. Hyun jumps in and tries to stab Shin in the head, but Shin spins around, grabs him, and then slams him straight to the ground. Shin lets out a powerful roar from the massive mouth in his stomach, shaking everyone, including Joe. Joe's soul then takes over and then aims for Shin's heart, but Shin is too fast and then rips off Joe's arm, causing him to bleed out and die. Shin slams the ground, sending rubble flying into Woo, Jisoo, and Hyuk, knocking them down. Shin then grabs Hyun just as he regains consciousness. Hyun tells him to get his ugly hand off him, but Shin throws him into a wall. Hyuk makes one final attempt and throws his gun at Shin, but Shin swats him aside. Jisoo is about to throw a rock at him, but Hyun stops her. He tells her to run and apologizes for not keeping his promise to write lyrics for her song. Hyun stands face to face with Shin and then enters his soul world. There, we see a younger version of Hyun playing with his father while his mother and sister watch. The child version notices present-day Hyun standing by the door. The child asks if he's leaving, and Hyun says yes, and that this will be the last time. The child waves goodbye, and then says that he hopes Hyun will be happy. Hyun opens the door and we return to reality, where he is now fully transformed into a monster. Although Hyun never wrote lyrics for Jisoo's song, he did come up with a title, Sweet Home. Hyun charges at Shin and then destroys him with his spear. Hyuk notices that Hyun's transformed form resembles Ryan, the guardian knight from their favorite anime. Jisoo tries to reach Hyun, but he's no longer in control. Hyun launches a spear at her, but Woo pushes her out of the way. Jisoo calls out to him again, but in his soul world, Hyun is with his family. He looks at the door, but then he chooses to stay with them. Woo pulls Jisoo away as she cries out, but Hyuk steps in front of Hyun, barely holding on to his humanity. Hyuk tells Hyun that they will never get to watch the Maria movie together. He spreads his arm open, and Hyun pierces through his chest with his arm. Hyuk screams at Jisoo and Woo to leave and then reveals his true desire, to stop Hyun and to save everyone else. Hyun throws a punch, but Hyuk catches it and his flesh begins to wrap around Hyun. Hyuk's final words are, "I'm going to stop you," before his body explodes into a massive mass of flesh. Jisoo and Woo make it across the rope and reunite with the others, mourning those that they lost. We then see a recording of Hyuk made 20 days after the outbreak. He explains that the group plans to escape and find a better life, and if anyone ever finds the tape, they should remember that they were here. Back on the roof, rain begins to fall. The massive flesh blob hardens and then cracks open, revealing 2 cocoons. However, one cocoon begins to open. Inside is Hyun, now emotionless, walking through the lobby naked. He finds Jisoo's phone on the ground with an audio file ready to play. He presses it, and Jisoo's song begins to play. Although these cocoon monsters lack emotions, Hyun begins to cry as he listens. And that is the original ending of Sweet Home, released in 2018. However, 2 years later in 2020, Carnby Kim released the official ending. We jump forward in time to winter. The survivors are alive and doing well. Yuri is training the children in combat while the military is now working with them. Woo attends a meeting with the military leaders and reunites with Yuri. Jisoo is shown writing lyrics for her new song titled Sweet Home. As she plays the guitar, we see the other survivors, including Wen, training with weapons. Byung stands guard at the wall when he suddenly notices something. Everyone gathers at the entrance and then sees a cloaked figure standing outside. The figure reveals himself to be Hyun. He smiles when he sees Jisoo, and the series ends with the group running towards Hyun as Jisoo embraces him. And that is the end of Sweet Home. A very large series, but an amazing one. The ending to the Sweet Home K-drama basically ends with Season 1. The military group tries to take over the apartment building, but the residents fight back. However, the military shows up and then wants Hyun, so Hyun turns himself in, while the rest of the residents leave through a secret tunnel. However, Hyuk stays behind and then dies, revealing that he's a monster now. And then the entire building collapses, killing him. That's just a little summary, but season 2 and 3 are like their own original content, so if you liked season 1, you can try and watch the remaining of the series. But I definitely think it was pretty obvious from my commentary that I believe the webtoon is 110 times better than the K-drama. I love the ending, I love the characters, I love the action, and if it wasn't a webtoon, it would definitely be my top 10 manga of all time, but it is definitely one of my favorite stories that I read on the channel. And I can't wait to read the prequel in the future. But I want to know, did you guys enjoy this series? Let me know in the comments. And if you want to support the channel, then why not check out the Discord, Patreon, and YouTube memberships? And if you want more horror videos like this one, then why not scroll down and hit that subscribe button? But I'll be seeing you guys in the next video.